Everyone really enjoyed the video on dividend investing, and I wanted to do a part two to address some of the questions and some of the concerns that I got from people who actually watch those videos. So if you haven't seen the dividend investing video, I'm going to put a link to it up here, part one. And it basically, I outline why I, as a financial advisor, don't really care that much about dividends. There's been a huge trend here on YouTube touting dividend-based investing as the way to go. And I made some basic points and highlighted some facts that aren't necessarily widely known as public knowledge about dividends that basically present dividends as more complicated than they're initially presented to individuals. And they're not necessarily the hot ticket when it comes to investing for a multitude of reasons. So please go back and watch part one of this video before watching part two. But let me just go ahead and get into part two of why dividend investing doesn't really make sense to me as a financial advisor and doesn't really add much to your investing experience. Stay with me. First, dividend investing. I think a lot of people assume that these companies are paying quarterly dividends and the money is just coming out of thin air. They're giving you a certain percentage of your overall invested shares back every quarter, and it just materializes from the universe. That's not the reality of how this works. It actually comes from the stock value and the stock price. So if a stock is worth $1 and it pays a dividend of 3 cents, the temporary value of that stock is depreciated to 97 cents when that 3-cent dividend is paid out. It's even more complicated than that in terms of when stocks can sell with the dividend factored in versus when a stock can sell after the dividend payment is factored in. It's quite complicated, but the premise is the money that is paid out to you quarterly in a dividend payout does not come from the ether. It comes from the value of the stock. And even more so, coming out of the value of the stock, you have to pay taxes on that money the year that it's earned versus or the year that it is taken. So I just wanted to clarify this one point that that money doesn't come out of thin air. The money that pays out of the dividends actually comes out of the value of that particular stock. I also wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about dividends kind of adjacent cousin, capital gains. A lot of people don't realize this because most of their investments are held within retirement accounts, whether that's a Roth IRA or traditional 401k, etc. But if you own a mutual fund and if you own it in an individual brokerage account, each year you'll have capital gain returns on that mutual funds, even if you do not sell $1 of that mutual fund throughout the year. How and why does that happen? Well, mutual funds is basically a basket of diversified stocks and bonds that are being actively managed by a portfolio manager and his or her entourage. Well, during the year, the portfolio manager is making trades on that account. You're a mutual fund owner, so you have no say-so in how and in what order those trades occur, but they're occurring during the year. And I remember a particularly active trade year like 2020 during the pandemic where there was that huge drop and then huge run up in the market. I had clients that had enormous capital gains returns on mutual funds held in brokerage accounts. And I got a lot of angry calls in January, February of the next year because they had $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 in capital gains that they did not plan for in their taxes because of the level of trading activity in their account from the mutual fund manager. So dividends are one thing, but also if you own mutual funds and you own them in an individual brokerage account or you own them outside of a retirement account, you need to have a conversation with your financial advisor or your accountant about capital gains returns every year. Now, I try to prepare my clients for this eventuality, especially if they're new to investing and they've never held mutual funds outside of a retirement account or a Roth account, that they will have a capital gains report at the end of the year. And sometimes capital gains can be significant because, a mutual fund essentially is a passive investment. You have no say so over when and how those taxes are accrued. So, one person did mention capital gains on mutual funds, and I wanted to explain what that is, why it occurs. Capital gains are also taxed at capital gains rate, but they are taxed the year that they are earned, not the year that they are spent, just like dividends. Let's talk about income. I made a quip in the first video with dividends that oftentimes dividend income is not that significant to the client. Dividend income can usually be 2 to 6% of the dividend holding stock value every year. If you have $100,000 in an account, that's $2,000 to $6,000. But my point was, if you find $2,000 to $6,000 to be significant and make a huge difference in your life, you probably wouldn't have $100,000 in a brokerage account. And I stand 10 toes deep in that assessment. Most of my clients who have dividend paying stocks honestly don't know the dividend paying stocks from a can of beans. I tell them they have dividend paying stocks. I explain what it means, but it kind of goes right over their heads. When you talk about performance, you talk about account metrics, and you talk about other things. They are not taking the dividend payout to sustain their current lifestyle. They're taking that dividend payout and they're investing either in the same stock, or in a few cases, they are investing in other stocks. The only people who are taking those dividends payouts, everyone in my book of business who's taking dividend pays out is over the age of 70. Most are over the age of 75, meaning they really are at a stage in life where they are living off the income that their investments produce. And since they're already being taxed on the dividends and capital gains, it just makes sense for them to take the money versus constantly reinvesting it for the future. So that I wanted to make that point about income. I am absolutely adamant that for the vast majority of people, it is not going to make that much of a difference. I think it makes a good selling point on social media and on YouTube for content creators that are dividend investors. It gets people's attention, but I think it gets people's attention for the wrong reason, especially when it's not adequately explained in depth what you're doing by taking the dividends and what long-term harvesting of dividends can do to growth. So someone made a good point about this in the comments section, and it's a little bit complicated, so I didn't talk about it in the first video, but something called fractional shares. Now, there are some reinvestment plans that don't offer fractional shares. And a fractional share, let's say you have a share that costs $150. Your dividends pay off and you only have $30 sitting in your account after the dividends have paid off. Some reinvestment plans will let you go in and buy 1/5 of a share of that stock. And most reinvestment plans say, no, we're not going to buy fractional shares. We can only buy whole shares of company stock when dividends pay out. So oftentimes people have cash idling in the account that we can't use to buy shares of anything, basically, because the amount of cash from the dividends sitting in their account doesn't equal one share of whatever stock they're trying to buy. So fractional shares can become problematic, and they also can become a drag on accounts in large quantities. We try to avoid the issue of fractional shares whenever possible. Another point that someone brought up that is actually an excellent point and is very true is that some companies will stop paying dividends for a period of time. Now, it is generally considered a very bad sign if a company that has consistently paid out dividends for many years stops paying dividends. Essentially, it's a sign to the market that the company is in financial distress, and generally the stock price will drop as a result of not paying out dividends or temporarily pausing dividends for a period of time. So most companies will avoid stopping their dividends at all costs, but it does happen. And I have had situations where clients bought stocks specifically for the dividends, and for whatever reason, the dividend payout stopped for a period of time. And at that point, generally what I have to do is call the client in and we have to reassess. Does it make sense to continue to own the stock? Hopefully that isn't a single stock portfolio. I've seen very few single stock portfolios in my career, and whatever stock that suddenly stopped paying out dividends usually represent a part of the portfolio, and we can make a decision whether we want to keep it or sell it, or how we want to feng shui different assets to make up for the loss of that dividend. But that was an excellent point, is that there are some companies that have stopped paying out dividends suddenly in the past because they couldn't afford to, or they were in a financial position where they needed to temporarily stop paying out dividends, or there were other things going on. Next, one thing that you have to be careful of, there are some companies that have like some eye-watering dividends, well in excess of 6%. I've seen dividends as high as 15%. But when you look behind the curtain of those stocks, often a very, very high dividend payout is making up for lackluster growth. Okay, so that stock pays out 15%. That stock hasn't gone anywhere in 10 years. So essentially you're trading a dividend payout for growth, and the stock is just idling along. There's often a reason why the company has a very high dividend payout, and you have to investigate that a little bit more. But if you're a dividend investor and you're wowed by dividends and you see a 15% dividend, you may be inclined to buy that investment just because it has a consistent 15% dividend, not realizing that it has virtually no growth, or it's masking other problems that may be going on behind the scenes in that company that may come to light. So, you can see cases where you see unusually high dividends making up for lackluster growth of an individual stock. Another point that I wanted to make that someone brought up in an email is dividends. I said dividends are taxed as capital gains. That's partially true. It's more nuanced than that. Qualified dividends are taxed as capital gain rate. Ordinary dividends or unqualified dividends are taxed at ordinary tax rates. Foreign dividends are a whole other kettle of fish and usually create problems when the person's trying to file their taxes, because you have extra paperwork you have to file for that taxation purposes. And I remember one client who owned a foreign stock came to me very upset because it paid dividends, and they had to pay an extra $300 on their taxes to their accountant to file this paperwork to declare that foreign dividend income to the IRS. So sometimes foreign dividends create more problems than they solve, but the vast majority of dividends are qualified dividends. They're taxed at capital gains. Unqualified dividends are taxed at ordinary income tax rates. So, in a nutshell, what I'm saying about dividends and what I believe about dividends as a financial advisor, I didn't mean in the first video to imply that dividends are bad. I don't believe that dividends are bad, but I don't believe that they are the holy grail and the answer that they are often presented as in social media. I think dividend paying stock has to be looked at in the context of a larger portfolio. It also has to be looked at in context of who the client is, their age, income, risk tolerance, and goals, to see if having a dividend producing stock makes sense in the grand scheme of their portfolio. I think it also needs to be explained in more nuance where dividend making stocks make sense and where they don't make sense. So there you have it, my take on dividend making stocks. I wanted to clarify a few positions from part 1 of this video. If you found this information educational or useful on dividends paying stock, please like, please share, and please subscribe. Thank you.